He doesn't knock. He doesn't announce himself. He simply appears quiet, steady, unavoidable. In Point Blank, justice doesn't roar. It echoes. When the film was released in 1967, many mistook it for a conventional crime story. But Point Blank was never meant to fit inside genre lines. It's too quiet, too fractured, too strange. The man at its center, Lee Marvin's Walker, barely speaks. He doesn't explain his actions. He doesn't reflect. He moves forward through a world that seems frozen in place, like it's waiting for him to finish something only he remembers. Director John Boorman didn't build a thriller. He built a cinematic limbo where sound falls out of sync, time circles itself, and silence weighs more than bullets. The structure is broken by design. The emotion is missing on purpose. And Walker doesn't seek revenge like a person. He follows it like a ritual. Behind this minimalist surface is a story even stranger, of unsanctioned prison shoots, a rewritten lead character, an unfinished score, and a final scene discovered rather than planned, of a studio that tried to suppress the film, and a lead actor who might have done more than just act. Some viewers believe Walker is alive and relentless. Others are convinced he died in the first 10 minutes. A few suspect he was never alive at all. Whatever he is, Point Blank doesn't offer closure, only presence. These are 20 weird facts you didn't know about Point Blank. But after hearing them, you may not see him or the film the same way again. Fact 1. Lee Marvin removed the dialogue not to simplify the character, but to strip him of identity. The original script gave Walker things to say, cold one-liners, reactions, sharp instructions, but Marvin didn't believe in them. To him, the man didn't need words, he needed distance, precision, emptiness. So, scene by scene, Marvin began cutting. He removed explanations, refused inner monologues, tossed away responses. When Boorman asked why, Marvin simply said, "He's already beyond talking." This wasn't minimalism, it was erasure. The more lines disappeared, the more Walker became a cipher. No emotions, no pleas, just movement. A man replaced by a function. What emerged was radical, especially for 1967. A protagonist who says almost nothing, who demands nothing, and whose silence doesn't suggest calm but consequence. His lack of dialogue doesn't make him unreadable. It makes him unrelatable, and that's the point. Critics were divided. Some called it wooden. Others saw a new kind of performance, one where absence became narrative, where withholding emotion didn't flatten a character, but hollowed him into something mythic. Marvin didn't raise his voice. He just removed it, and the silence was louder than anything written for him. Fact 2. The opening was shot inside a forbidden location because no studio set could match its decay. When Walker stumbles through the ruined interior of Alcatraz, it feels too real. Because it is. That's not a backlot, not a matte painting. It's the actual prison, abandoned, echoing, off limits. And Boorman wasn't supposed to be there. At the time, filming on the island was prohibited without federal clearance. MGM didn't have it. No permits, no crew authorization. But Boorman wasn't interested in red tape. One morning, with a minimal team and Marvin in tow, he went in anyway. They shot fast. No lighting rigs, no stunt doubles, just natural light, handheld cameras, and the raw decay of concrete and rust. Every creak and echo on the soundtrack is authentic, every surface touched by time. The studio was horrified when they found out. Legal departments scrambled, but the footage stayed quietly, uncredited, and unforgettable. That rogue decision gave Point Blank its tone before the first word was spoken. Cold, hollow, illicit. A man walking through a space not meant for the living. Fact 3. The film's soundscape was engineered to disturb, not entertain. Something about Point Blank sounds wrong, and that's entirely by design. From the first frame, nothing sits where it should. Footsteps land off beat. Conversations echo without cause. Background noise bleeds across scenes. Boorman and sound designer Gordon Daniel didn't want clarity. They wanted pressure. They separated sound from image, shifted timing, boosted ambient frequencies to make rooms hum with unease. At times, the audio feels delayed, like the world is reacting a second too late or too early. It creates tension you can't explain. Viewers report feeling uneasy, even when nothing's happening. A hallway becomes oppressive. A quiet room sounds like it's listening back. One sequence, Walker approaching a target through an office corridor, is almost unbearable in its stillness. No music, just his footsteps. Sharp, hollow, infinite. MGM wanted changes. They called the mix unprofessional. Boorman refused, and decades later, that refusal is remembered not as a flaw, but as foresight. The sound design wasn't broken. It was fractured just like the man at the center of it. Fact 4. Many believe the film takes place after Walker's death, and it's hard to prove otherwise. Point Blank opens with a betrayal. A man is shot, left to bleed in a prison no one visits. Then, without explanation, he's alive, calm, focused, walking through a world that seems incomplete. No recovery, no explanation, just momentum. From that moment on, the film feels unmoored. Time skips, scenes repeat, logic fails. Walker seems immune to consequence, almost invisible to the people he targets. His presence doesn't register like a man's. It feels like something chasing closure. That's the foundation of a persistent theory. Walker died in the opening scene. Everything after is imagined. A looping purgatory built from guilt, unfinished revenge, and fragmented memory. Borman never confirmed this, but he didn't need to. In interviews, he hinted, "I wasn't interested in realism. I was interested in persistence." The film's structure supports the idea. Conversations happen in impossible locations. People vanish after confessing. The world reacts to Walker less like a threat and more like a shadow they can't outrun. So maybe it's not his story we're watching. Maybe it's theirs. And he's just what's left when the damage can't be undone. Fact 5. The film's imagery was pulled from paintings, not from cinema. There's something unnatural about how Point Blank looks. Rooms are too wide, angles are too sharp. People feel like they've been abandoned in spaces meant for no one. Borman wasn't inspired by other films. He was studying canvases. He referenced the surreal stillness of Giorgio de Chirico, the desolate geometry of empty architecture, the way shadows fall too long and figures appear lost, even in their own environments. That influence shows in every frame. Characters are dwarfed by buildings. Walker is framed like a statue posed, inert, surrounded by vacancy. No shot invites you in. Every image pushes you back. Borman drained the color intentionally, flattened contrast, neutralized warmth. The city becomes a gallery of absence, modern, clean, lifeless. Even the camera movements mimic a viewer in a museum, slow, observational, slightly detached. This wasn't production design, it was psychological terrain. A world designed to match a character who's already emotionally dead. It's not noir. It's not action. It's composition built for quiet dread. Borman wasn't inspired by other films. He was studying canvases. Borman wasn't inspired by other films. He was studying canvases. It was real. Marvin didn't lean on stunt doubles. He didn't demand accommodations. What you see on screen, his gait, his stiffness, his fatigue, isn't character work. It's the weight of memory pressed into the present. He wore his own scars. One scene, shot in a bare bathroom, shows him shirtless. The line down his back wasn't makeup, it was his. Borman didn't need to direct him much. He let Marvin bring whatever he needed to. And what Marvin brought wasn't just rage, it was history. Borman didn't need to direct him much. He let Marvin bring whatever he needed to. And what Marvin brought wasn't just rage, it was history. That gravity never left the frame. It shaped Walker into more than a man with a mission. It made him a man who had already lived through the worst, which is why nothing in the film surprises him. He's been through worse. He just doesn't talk about it anymore. Fact 7. One of the film's most sterile scenes was shot in a room where people once waited to die. There's a moment in Point Blank where Walker confronts a man through thick glass, separated by walls of concrete and silence. It feels artificial too, still, too sanitized. But that unease isn't fiction. It came with the location. That scene wasn't built, it was found. Before he ever stepped onto a soundstage, Marvin had been through war. He was wounded in the Pacific, hospitalized, left with permanent damage in his spine. By the time he played Walker, the limp wasn't part of the performance. No one on set spoke about it, but the energy shifted. The sound was wrong. The light felt unnatural. Borman said nothing. He liked what the space gave him tension without effort. When Marvin stood on one side of the glass, his posture didn't change, but the silence in the room deepened. The air got heavy. The location dictated the scene, and though no one acknowledged it at the time, it left a mark. Because sometimes a room doesn't just reflect the mood, it creates it. Before he ever stepped onto a soundstage, Marvin had been through war. He was wounded in the Pacific, hospitalized, left with permanent damage in his spine. By the time he played Walker, the limp wasn't part of the performance. From the start, the studio misunderstood Point Blank. They expected a tough revenge story, guns, gangsters, maybe a love triangle. What they got was silence, disruption, structure they couldn't map. When they saw the first cut, the response was almost disbelief. "This isn't what we paid for," one executive reportedly said. Boorman didn't argue, Marvin didn't flinch. The studio asked for edits, clarity, a more audience-friendly ending. Boorman refused. So did Marvin. MGM backed off, but with conditions. No major marketing push, no prime theater slots. The film was released with little noise, buried beneath louder, safer titles. And yet, it endured. Critics overseas recognized its artistry. Younger filmmakers passed around bootleg copies. Film students dissected its structure like scripture. A movie meant to be forgotten became something else entirely. Boorman later called it the film that survived rejection. Because sometimes the studio doesn't bury a film, they plant it. Fact 9. The character's name was changed at the last minute and accidentally became myth. In Westlake's original novel, the protagonist was named Parker, sharp, calculating, relentless. But Boorman's version of the character drifted from the source. Less human, more symbolic, almost spectral. Westlake wasn't pleased. He refused to allow the use of the name unless the adaptation followed the book faithfully. It didn't. The studio faced a choice: fight for the name or rewrite around it. They chose the latter. And so, Walker was born. It's a name with no backstory, no cultural baggage, just a verb in disguise. He walks through rooms, through cities, through people. He doesn't run, he doesn't chase, he moves. No one says the name aloud in the film. It appears in credits, nowhere else. He's not introduced, not identified. He simply exists. Ironically, that anonymity elevated him. Parker was a man. Walker became a force. And the change, born from legal compromise, created a character you can't fully locate. You can only follow. Fact 10. The fewer lines Walker had, the more powerful he became. And Marvin knew it. In the earliest drafts of Point Blank, Walker talked. Not a lot, but enough to explain himself. He had lines of dialogue that framed his motives, filled the silence, and offered context. Marvin wanted none of it. He believed Walker didn't speak because he didn't need to. He wasn't seeking connection. He wasn't pleading a case. He was there to complete something without interference, without emotion. So, line by line, Marvin dismantled the script. Pages became half pages. Conversations became gestures. Whole scenes were built around glances and breath. Boorman let it happen. He saw what Marvin saw. The quieter Walker became, the louder the story got. Audiences leaned in, trying to understand a man who offered no explanation. Some called it minimalist, but it wasn't reduction, it was subtraction with purpose. Walker wasn't just quiet, he was empty, and that emptiness gave him presence. Because in a film where everyone talks to cover their guilt, the only man who says nothing might be the one they're all trying to forget. Fact 11. The editing was intentionally irrational, so the viewer would start questioning reality. Executives were lost. They wanted structure, a plot. Boorman refused. Marvin backed him. Boorman believed that trauma fractures perception. That memory doesn't play like film, so he cut the movie like a mind under pressure. Past and present collapse into each other. Time loops. Space stretches. What matters isn't what happened, but how it's remembered. Some transitions are seamless. Others are jarring. You realize characters are revisiting locations, but you're unsure whether it's real or imagined. The repetition becomes suffocating, just like Walker's focus. Executives were lost. They wanted structure, a plot. Boorman refused. Marvin backed him. What emerged wasn't a conventional thriller. It was an experience, one where the viewer is forced to navigate confusion the same way the characters do. Because if Walker doesn't see time clearly, why should we? It's not glamorous. It's not cinematic. MGM thought they had greenlit a revenge movie. Linear, clean, predictable. The script read that way. The shoot seemed to follow that plan. But once the footage was in the can, Boorman made a different movie. Behind closed doors, he recut scenes, reordered entire sequences, and deleted dialogue that explained too much. With Marvin's quiet support, he began shaping Point Blank into something else. Not a story of what happened, but a story about how it felt. Boorman agreed. MGM thought they had greenlit a revenge movie. Linear, clean, predictable. The script read that way. The shoot seemed to follow that plan. But once the footage was in the can, Boorman made a different movie. Behind closed doors, he recut scenes, reordered entire sequences, and deleted dialogue that explained too much. With Marvin's quiet support, he began shaping Point Blank into something else. Not a story of what happened, but a story about how it felt. Fact 13. Boorman didn't just direct the film, he rebuilt it in the editing room without permission. MGM thought they had greenlit a revenge movie. Linear, clean, predictable. The script read that way. The shoot seemed to follow that plan, but once the footage was in the can, Boorman made a different movie. And in the end, the studio gave up not because they agreed, but because they couldn't win. The star and the director had taken control, and what emerged wasn't a compromise. No statement. No final files. Boorman later said Mandel disagreed with the direction the film was taking. The fractured editing, the absence of structure, the refusal to explain. He wrote for emotion, Boorman said, but we were removing it. Night after night, the cut changed. The narrative loosened. Clarity was sacrificed for tone. Rhythm replaced structure. What they created wasn't music. It was pressure. Tension without melody. There's no official soundtrack, no album release, because Point Blank doesn't sound like a film. Night after night, the cut changed. The narrative loosened. Clarity was sacrificed for tone. Rhythm replaced structure. And in the end, the studio gave up not because they agreed, but because they couldn't win. The star and the director had taken control, and what emerged wasn't a compromise. Veteran of dozens of sets, Marvin knew how a scene should feel, how light should fall, how silence should stretch. And on this film, he didn't hold back. During scenes with sparse dialogue and long visual tension, he often stepped in. He'd reposition blocking, adjust pacing, suggest shot composition. Boorman, instead of resisting, let it happen. And what emerged wasn't a compromise. There's no official soundtrack, no album release, because Point Blank doesn't sound like a film. And what emerged wasn't a compromise. Veteran of dozens of sets, Marvin knew how a scene should feel, how light should fall, how silence should stretch. And on this film, he didn't hold back. During scenes with sparse dialogue and long visual tension, he often stepped in. And what emerged wasn't a compromise. Veteran of dozens of sets, Marvin knew how a scene should feel, how light should fall, how silence should stretch. And on this film, he didn't hold back. During scenes with sparse dialogue and long visual tension, he often stepped in. There's no official soundtrack, no album release, because Point Blank doesn't sound like a film. Fact 16. A subplot suggesting government complicity was quietly removed before anyone could ask questions. The earliest drafts of Point Blank included lines that didn't feel like noir fiction, they felt like warning shots. Phrases like off-books funding, regional clearance, and institutional laundering were scattered through dialogue. None of them were explained. Then, without announcement, they disappeared. The script originally hinted that the organization Walker was pursuing wasn't just a criminal network, it was tied to a shadowy federal operation. Characters made references to Washington's silence, to keeping things clean in the Bay Area. That language got flagged, quietly. Studio legal advisors pushed back, not because it was wrong, but because it was close. Boorman didn't fight it. He trimmed the material, removed 2 scenes, changed a name. But fragments remain. A file folder with a blurred seal. A hallway where a security badge flashes an insignia too real to be fake. The movie stopped naming names, but it never really stopped pointing fingers. And in doing so, it became less political and more dangerous. Fact 17. The gun never empties, and it's not because the film forgot. Most action films take pride in showing reloading, spent shells, magazine swaps, physical tension tied to capacity. Point Blank doesn't bother. Walker fires, walks, fires again. The slide never locks back. He never checks the chamber. And yet no one questions it. That's because Boorman wanted him to feel less like a man and more like a mechanism. The gun wasn't a tool. It was part of him, just like breath, just like silence. In reality, it breaks logic. But within the world of Point Blank, it makes too much sense. Walker doesn't reload because he's not constrained by mechanics. He's not operating in real time. He doesn't obey the laws of action cinema. He obeys the laws of inevitability. He's not dangerous because he's armed. He's dangerous because he never stops pulling the trigger. Fact 18. A slap scene spiraled into something real, and they never did another take. There's a moment in Point Blank where Lynn, Walker's estranged wife, slaps him again and again. No music, no cutaways, just impact, repeated, long enough to make you uncomfortable. It wasn't blocked that way. The script called for a quick moment, 2 strikes, maybe 3. But Boorman told actress Sharon Acker to keep going until something changed. Marvin never reacted, never flinched. He stood still, absorbing it. 10 slaps in, maybe more. Acker's hands were shaking. The sound on set turned hollow. No one called cut. When it finally ended, she walked off, set in tears. Marvin said nothing. He only nodded once to Boorman. That was the take, and it stayed. No edits, no smoothing, just a moment where pain bled through performance and into something harder to define. Some say it was brave, others call it exploitative, but no one forgot it, because whatever happened in that scene, it wasn't acting anymore. Fact 19. The color of the film wasn't muted by time, it was designed to look lifeless from the start. From its opening frames, Point Blank doesn't look like a film from the 1960 seconds. It's not rich, not golden, it doesn't glow, it drains. Everything feels clinical, washed in grays, blues, whites. Even skin looks like paper under fluorescent light. That wasn't degradation, that was the blueprint. Borman and cinematographer Philip Lathrop worked with the lab to bleach the warmth out of the palette. They used cool filters, low saturation stocks, and flat lighting setups. Colors were deliberately neutralized. Shadows weren't dramatic, they were dead. The goal wasn't style, it was tone. They weren't shooting a revenge story, they were building a visual coma. Walker doesn't move through a city, he moves through something that used to be a city. It has the form, but not the life. Walls reflect light without warmth. Suits look sterile. Nothing breathes. The result is emotional anesthesia. You don't feel what's happening. You observe it like someone replaying a memory that no longer means anything. And in that stillness, a truth emerges. Sometimes a story doesn't fade over time. It's colorless from the beginning. When Walker stumbles through the ruined interior of Alcatraz, it feels too real. Because it is. That's not a backlot, not a matte painting. It's the actual prison, abandoned, echoing, off limits. When Walker stumbles through the ruined interior of Alcatraz, it feels too real. Because it is. That's not a backlot, not a matte painting. It's the actual prison, abandoned, echoing, off limits. The studio was horrified when they found out. Legal departments scrambled, but the footage stayed quietly, uncredited, and unforgettable. The script included a showdown, guns, a decision, a final reckoning. But on the day it was scheduled, Marvin questioned it. He wouldn't show up, he said. Borman paused, listened, then made a call. They scrapped the climax, told Marvin to walk. The weather cooperated. Fog rolled in thick, natural, unplanned. The cameras captured it. One take. That footage became the last image. Borman paused, listened, then made a call. The script included a showdown, guns, a decision, a final reckoning. But on the day it was scheduled, Marvin questioned it. He wouldn't show up, he said. So maybe that last scene isn't a conclusion. Maybe it's the story finishing itself the only way it could, by fading into the same gray space it came from. They scrapped the climax, told Marvin to walk. The weather cooperated. Fog rolled in thick, natural, unplanned. The cameras captured it. One take. When Walker stumbles through the ruined interior of Alcatraz, it feels too real. Because it is. That's not a backlot, not a matte painting. It's the actual prison, abandoned, echoing, off limits. What if Walker isn't a man coming back for revenge, but the embodiment of guilt rising back to the surface? Not a person, but a presence. Not someone who lived, but something summoned by those who betrayed him. He doesn't explain. He doesn't hesitate. He doesn't evolve. He simply moves through walls, through systems, through people who think they've buried what they did, by fading into the same gray space it came from. This theory reframes the entire film. It's not Walker's story, it's theirs. The people trying to survive the aftermath of a decision that won't die. There are no flashbacks, no origin scenes. No one really knows him. They just react to him, like a past that's arrived in human form. Borman, when asked about this theory, said, "Perhaps the film isn't asking you to understand him. It's asking if you've met him, because guilt doesn't knock. It walks in, quiet, and never leaves until it's ready." He said nothing, left no message, took nothing with him, and yet we're still trying to understand who he was. Let us know in the comments. Was Walker hunting justice? Or was he the judgment itself? And if there's another film that leaves you in the same kind of silence, the kind that lingers after the credits, and asks more than it answers, tell us. Because not every character speaks, some just arrive. And when they leave, they take something with them.